Welcome everyone to Close Chronology examination number 3. Let's find out who we're going to be covering this month. Aretha Franklin. Nice. I don't know anything about her. Nah, I know a few songs. Let's see how cool this will go. Let's see how long this video gets. Hopefully it's not an hour like this one.
Many months later.
Welcome back to the Close Chronology examination. It's been way too long, since August, and for months I was alluding to this video, and here it is, the grand return all 84 of you were waiting for. Yes, that's right, I'm up to 84 subscribers. And if I get to 90, another AMA will follow. Who is this Aretha gal? Aretha Franklin was an R&B singer born in 1942 who began singing and playing piano from a very young age. She was raised in Detroit as the daughter of a well-known and respected minister, C.L. Franklin, but she had a difficult childhood. Her parents divorced when she was 6, her mom died when she was 9, and she was already a mother of 2 children by age 15. Upon learning of his daughter's great vocal abilities, Reverend Franklin decided to have her sing for his church. He eventually became her manager and helped her sign her first deal with JVB Records at the young age of 14. Aretha's father installed recording equipment in his church, and this is where Aretha recorded her first singles, Never Grow Old, You Grow Closer, and Precious Lord Parts 1 and 2, all covers of standards in gospel music. She personally knew the soul stirrers and Mavis Staples through her father. Prominent soul singer Dinah Washington heard her sing once and told young entrepreneur Quincy Jones that she was the next one. He must have not seen anything in her because she was not signed with his label Mercury. In the late 1950s, she met Sam Cooke in California, and her sister dated Marvin Gaye. Upon turning 18, she and her father moved back to New York, where she showed 2 songs as demos to Columbia Records. They recognized her talent and signed her on a year-by-year monetary contract. In 1960, she released the song Today I Sing the Blues, to no response in the Hot 100, but it did reach number 10 on the Rhythm and Blues chart.
Blues walked in this morning and circled around.
She recorded that song among several others with pianist Ray Bryant and other studio musicians under the arrangement of John Leslie McFarland. Spoiler alert, she has quite a few albums, like a lot of albums. You might want to pour yourself a cup of coffee and get comfortable, but I'm sure that if an album gets too homogeneous, I can just describe the general sound of each album and give some tracks as examples, right? One of the promises I have is that I will always give at least a small mention to every single track on every album I discuss. No? Okay, stick around until the end to find out what changes I'll be making to the series. Back to Aretha, one thing you'll notice about her music is that she's a very singular and powerful individual, and her music speaks for itself, which is why I won't have very much to say about the songs themselves. I'm going to try to keep this video short, emphasis on try. Anyway, with all of these songs recorded, Columbia could finally issue her debut album. Let's see how this goes for her. This album was created under the pretense that Columbia didn't know what style of music fit her best. So we hear many different jazz standards and other genres as well. Won't Be Long shows her youthful voice, showcases her vocal range, which reached an astonishing G2 to E6. This song establishes her as an outstanding vocal performer and elevates her from other singers of her time, and even now. She's still finding her voice at this point, but this is a great place to start. A good example is Over the Rainbow, and being familiar with this song for so long without knowing that Aretha did a cover made this a welcome surprise. She had so much to the song. She shows off her immense vocal range on Sweet Love, All Night Long, Right Now, Are You Sure, Maybe I'm a Fool and It Ain't Necessarily So. Another noteworthy showcase of this album is interplay. The other musicians interact often with her voice, interjecting their licks into her voice's absence. This is made clear on the track By Myself and Closer Today I Sing the Blues, where the guitarist is the MVP. This album has good production for pre-Motown explosion early 60s music. Aretha the album was released on February 27th of 1961. The album itself failed to chart, but it was supported by the singles Love Is the Only Thing, Are You Sure, and Won't Be Long, the last of which got to number 7 on the R&B chart and number 76 on the Hot 100. During the rest of 1961, she married songwriter Ted White, and she toured around the Northeast US, playing and singing her songs at performance halls. This album is available on Spotify under the name Aretha in Person with the Ray Bryant Combo, but some people, such as myself, have decided to call it Aretha 61 after the year was released. It was a minor ripple in the vast ocean of music, but I think it was a fine debut album. It's nowhere near as monumental as what she would do later, but it's fine. Aretha went back into the studio in late 1961, and over the next few years she would regularly record sessions at Columbia Studios. These recordings would make up the next few albums. You see, in the early 1960s, the concept of an album as a full art piece had not been formed yet, and albums were just that, by definition, albums. Collections of songs with no intent of being cohesive. Here's what I thought of these songs. It was good to hear Aretha being paired up with an orchestra on the first song, It Made Me Love You, and the songs Rockabye Your Baby with a Dixie Melody, It's So Heartbreaking, Just For You, That Lucky Old Sun, and I Surrender Dear benefit from having an orchestra. They only gave orchestras to the best singers in the world, and this almost totally helped her. I Told You So is jazzier and more complex. Nobody Like You would have fit on Aretha, and I appreciate the juxtaposition of putting Exactly Like You right after Nobody Like You. Rough Lover is fine, but once I realized she didn't write it, it skewed my perception of the song. Blue Holiday is a smaller scope song, and Closer Accentuate the Positive is another cover of a gospel song. What made my time with her early work more enjoyable is I knew a lot of the songs that she recorded in her jazz standard format. This album in general was okay, but a few of the songs sounded very similar to each other. Hopefully this doesn't happen again with her music. The Electrifying Aretha Franklin was released on March 19th, 1962. The album didn't chart anywhere, but she cracked the top 40 of the Hot 100 for the first time with the single Rockabye Your Baby with a Dixie Melody, which got to 37. Between now and her next album, she performed a concert in Florida. Aretha kept making music throughout the summer of 1962. These recordings took shape as the album you see here. Don't Cry Baby is a strong opener, but it rhymes mean with mean, so 0 out of 10, I want my money back. Try a Little Tenderness is a great slow song, if really slow. It was made more famous in 1966 by Otis Redding. Remember him, he'll be important later. Here's one of two of my biggest problems with this album. Her being arranged with a full orchestra and little else loses those qualities of interplay and counterpoint found on her first, and even her second record. This is made apparent on I Apologize, Look for the Silver Lining, I'm Wondering, How Deep is the Ocean, and I Don't Know You Anymore. This homogeneity is problematic, but not overwhelming. There's still a lot of room for variety. In fact, Without the One You Love is the first song she wrote that got put on an album. And wow, this is a great song. She should write songs more often. I'm Sitting on Top of the World picks up the pace after a series of slow songs. Just for a Thrill is another slow song, if really slow, but then it greatly picks up the pace. God Bless the Child, the classic Billie Holiday jazz song, is done very well by her. And Lover Come Back to Me is a great closer in comparison. It stands out in this album solely because of its pacing, it's just a good closer. The Tender, the Moving, the Swinging Aretha Franklin was released on August 13th, 1962. And its commercial performance is an outlier in her discography. You see, it got to number 69 on the Hot 200, but didn't even crack the R&B chart, which would be the only time in her discography where an album of hers did better on the Hot 200 than the R&B chart. It also produced no hit singles, as she hadn't found an audience or her voice yet. Between now and her next album, she performed a few times in Indiana and Iowa. Aretha was incredibly prolific at this time, recording dozens of songs in Columbia Studios. Too bad they weren't good songs. This album, I Am Not Joking, might as well be one song. For all we know, make someone happy, say it isn't so, until the real thing comes along, if ever I would leave you, and Mr. Ugly are all slow waltzes. To have that many songs on an album sound the same is already bad enough, but to top it off, they're all in the same key. C major. This reminds me of Taylor Swift's 2017 album Reputation, which also had too many songs in C major. Not all of Laughing on the Outside songs were exactly the same. Skylark introduces backing vocals, and she should keep doing that. I Wonder is another slow song. Why does it stand out? It's a slow song, but in a different key, B-flat major, and it's written by Aretha. No joke, I listened to Tender Moving Swinging and this album in the same session, and when I heard that song, this was my reaction. Roll it.
The coaches.
Solitude is one of those well-known American classics that was distributed as one per album, and this version is great. Laughing on the Outside is fine. I also want to shout out the flute flourishing at the end. Where Are You is another slow song, but I like this part where all of the instruments drop out for it to be just her and the guitar. I Want to Be Around is a fun closer because it takes the waltz feel and speeds it way up, and I enjoy the sarcasm in her voice. Laughing on the Outside was released on August 12th, 1963. Just one day short of being a year since Tender Moving Swinging. This album had no single and charted nowhere, but the most well-known song from this album is Skylark. I know why, it's a good song. Between now and her next album, she played 2 dates in New York, and she welcomed a 3rd child. Soul singer Dinah Washington, known for her beautiful and uplifting songs, was one of the most successful black artists of the 1950s, and she was the one who predicted Aretha to be the next one. Sadly, she died of 2 simultaneous overdoses in 1963 at only 39 years old, which shook Aretha, as Dinah was her biggest influence and was good friends with her father. Aretha decided that she would record an album completely consisting of covers made famous by Dinah. Unforgettable is the first individual song of hers that I recommend you check out. It's charming. Cold Cold Heart really takes its time. It has diverse instrumentation with a harmonica, an organ, and piano all clashing with her voice, in a good way. What a Difference a Day Made is satisfying because she has a very convincing vocal delivery. Drinking Again has interplay for the first time in a while. I love the way the organ swells up and draws back throughout. Nobody Knows the Way I Feel This Morning is the first song of hers to break 5 minutes. The organ and piano work are superb, which is usually quiet and reserved on her albums, is flashy here. It's easily the best song on this album. This theme of diverse instrumentation continues with Evil Gal Blues, Don't Say You're Sorry Again, and This Bitter Earth. Organs, harmonicas, and vibraphones are a fresh sound for her. The C major slow waltz, If I Should Lose You, gave me a war flashback to the last 2 albums. But the most important song on this album is, without a doubt, closer, Soulville.
Tell me the way to get to Soulville, baby.
This is it. She finds her sound. With backing vocals and the organ and the showy drumming, she creates a groovy, danceable, sassy, but also deeply personal and soulful sound. She name drops the Black Eyed Peas 30 years before they were formed, so that's a bonus.
I'm talking about the Black Eyed Peas.
It's a little rough around the edges, but you can tell this is the song where she finds her voice. Unforgettable may be an inconsistent project, but I appreciate the variety between the songs with live instrumentation and the selections with orchestra, especially after 2 albums that might as well be 2 songs. Unforgettable, a tribute to Dinah Washington, was released on February 18th, 1964. It did not chart, had no singles, but that doesn't matter as it is her best album yet. And it seems like a very important album to her. It was an album she needed and wanted to make, and above all, it shows growth and exploration, with one song showing a glimpse of things to come. Between now and her next album, she sang live at a jazz festival in Ohio. With You Life breathed into what was looking to be a stale career, Aretha wanted to look forward and adopt pop sounds. To achieve this, Columbia looked to Aretha's hometown Detroit and their signature label Motown for inspiration. These tracks blend orchestra and jazz standards with a pop-oriented sound. That's the result they were going for. What does it sound like? It sounds like an entire album based off the closer Soulville from the last album. Like that song, all of these are poppy, energetic, and powerful, but a consequence of the desire for a more trendy sound is that the production falls to the wayside, and the album in general sounds like a very premature version of the sound she will eventually be known for. Her vocal delivery is stellar no matter what situation you put her in. However, Mockingbird, for example, is a strong opener, showcasing the artistic shift to being Motown influenced. Every Little Bit, the Shoop Shoop song, You'll Lose a Good Thing, Running Out of Fools, and Two Sides of Love are the best examples of this premature production. How Glad I Am is a waltz and sounds like the last three albums, but it has the traditional Motown flares like the guitar playing the same part as the bass and a tambourine in the background. Walk On By is the rare song of hers written by Burt Bacharach, and the key changes in trumpet playing are what gave it away for me. There's still room for instrumentation, like the flute on I Can't Wait Until I See My Baby's Face. It's just a matter of time. Unfortunately, it has the shadows of the C major waltzes of Tender Moving and Laughing on the Outside, but the guitar and piano work make up for it. Aretha covers the then popular song My Guy with her newly burgeoning vocal stylings. Closer One Room Paradise goes full on Motown. I'm sensing a pattern here, where the closer is a step away from the rest of the album and presents a preview of what would come next. Running Out of Fools was released on November 16th, 1964. Don't expect anyone to get it right the first try, but this album led to a more positive reception than ever before for her. The album got to number 84 on the Hot 100 and number 9 on the R&B 200. The album underperformed on the Hot 200 due to the segregated nature of the chart. However, she was starting to speak out more against segregation and working with the civil rights movement. It should be noted that going forward, there isn't a single album of hers that performed better on the Billboard chart than the Billboard R&B chart. The title track got to number 10 on the R&B Hot 100. The greater public was beginning to take an interest in her. Between now and her next album, she played a few shows in Indiana, Maryland, and New York. During this time, we got her first live album, Songs of Faith. With the modest success that was Running Out of Fools, Aretha and Columbia decided they would make a live album, doubling down on jazz standards like Misty, hiring a quartet to back her up. Clearly, the civil rights movement was on her mind, as it also featured the iconic social protest folk anthem, If I Had a Hammer. Once in a Lifetime, Muddy Water, and Trouble in Mind continued the interplay and jazziness found in the first song. I like the up-tempo more. They recorded this album live in Columbia Studios. The crowd sounds were overdubbed later. Could have fooled me. The intro song, This Could Be the Start of Something, has the interplay and jazziness of the songs on her first album. Major props to the instrumentalists. Today I Love Everybody starts off slow and picks up the tempo very quickly, which is fun, and a much needed literal change of pace, which leads to There Is No Greater Love, which goes from a slow free tempo call and response session to up-tempo lounge music to a slow waltz. An interesting structural choice. Aretha wrote the melodic Without the One You Love for her third album, Tender Moving Swinging. This version is better because I think the jazz group complements it more. The really well-known standards If I Had a Hammer and Love for Sale are done with great care, and the payoff is having two of the best versions of these songs out there. At best, this album's a diversion. At worst, it's a regression. Yeah was released on May 17th, 1965. The album got to number 101 on the Hot 200 and number 8 on the R&B chart. It even got to number 93 in Switzerland. After that live album, it was time for another. These tracks double down on that Motown sound with orchestra. Until You Were Gone, Follow Your Heart, Sweet Bitter Love, Swanee, I'm Losing You, and Cry Like a Baby best exemplify this. There are some songs that are fine on their own though. You Made Me Love You is a re-record from Electrifying, but this time incorporating swing brass. Old Man River's on here. It's a well-known and haunting dirge of a song. It's from Showboat originally. A Mother's Love is a piece with just her, an organ, and a choir. This is the album where her vocal technique, every part of it, finally clicks together. It's really good. Take a Look is a new civil rights song, and it's fine. She should do that more often. But the most notable track on here is definitely the penultimate track, Can't You Just See Me. It is the first song of hers with full-on Motown-style production. It is the most danceable of hers so far. And there's a guitar solo for the first time since Aretha 61. This is basically an album full of ideas that go nowhere, and we'll have to be very patient to see how they play out for the rest of her career. There's just too much or too little of various qualities for this album to be a guaranteed classic. No one cares what I think because this album actually got to number 132 on the Hot 100 and number 8 on the R&B 200. Between now and her next album, she played a few shows in Washington, Missouri, and Illinois. During one of the Chicago shows, WVON radio host Purvis Spann announced she would be the Queen of Soul and put a crown on her head. Despite all this new attention on Aretha, and that she's truly getting into the groove of subject matter, style, and voice, there failed to be a successful monetary intake thus far, so Columbia dropped her. Warner Records partner Jerry Wexler convinced her to move to English-language pop subsidiary Atlantic Records in late 1966. However, in the contract, Columbia was entitled to all releases of previously recorded material. So while Aretha was already planning out her next album and getting ready to record, Columbia released this next album before it simply because they could. Most of the songs on here were recorded around the same time as Soul Sister, and they're pretty much the same album, this one being the worst. What were the execs at Columbia thinking? Why Was I Born, I May Never Get to Heaven, Tighten Up Your Tie, Button Up Your Jacket, Her Little Heart Went to Loveland, Only the One You Love, Deeper, and Remember Me were just retreads. A little bit of soul is good solely because it's different, incorporating the popular dance music of the time. The best songs on this album are Aretha originals, Take It Like You Give It, Land of Dreams, and the gospel-influenced Lee Cross. That last one is the second individual song that I recommend you check out. It is indicative of the sound that would follow soon. Those songs are fine, but at some point this album feels like a B-sides record. It's 'cause it is. I see this album as less of a standalone project and more as a cash grab, and it didn't even succeed because this album charted nowhere. Between now and her next album, she performed only once in Maryland, quite possibly because she was raising 3 children not much younger than her. We're finally here. This is the smash hit commercial debut we've been waiting for. Part of its success can be chalked up to her partnership with Atlantic Records. Clearly, Atlantic gave her way more creative control than Columbia, letting her write more songs on her records and direct a group of backing musicians from Alabama known as the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section. They were called on to record the backing tracks of her album at Fame Studios, which means I finally get to screw in a light bulb and shine some light on the bassist Tommy Cogbill. Tommy was a bassist who played on the next few of her albums, but he also worked with many great musicians both before and after his time with Aretha, like Bob Seger, Wilson Pickett, Dusty Springfield, and Elvis Presley. His bass playing is punchy and melodic. There are some recordings like the live and lively version of Skinny Legs and All by Joe Tex, where he completely carries the song.
Now, who'll take the woman with the skinny legs? Stand right there, baby. I'm gonna give you away in a minute.
As a bass player, he is a personal hero of mine. Aretha's commercial success may be partially owed to Tommy Cogbill's ability to create recognizable bass lines, providing a low counterpoint to her voice. While the Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section recorded the title track just fine, Aretha's husband and manager Ted White got into a fight with the trumpet player and the studio manager. Remember the name Ted White, he's going to be important later. Now the rhythm section was flown up to New York to finish recording, but due to tape discrepancies, there ended up being an issue on the final version of Do Right Woman, Do Right Man. Can you guess the problem?
A woman's only human. You should understand.
That's right, the piano is slightly sharp. Great, so now I can finally talk about the song I know you know from her, Respect. an outright classic. Her vocal delivery has equal parts sassiness and pleading. This song, which is another cover of an Otis Redding song, added a few breakdowns and a key change with the saxophone solo, as well as a few reworked lyrics. She had already been performing this song live for years since the original came out, but this version is uniquely her. Her sisters provide backup vocals, and they are just as much an integral part of the song as she is. Is it any surprise this was a huge hit for her? No, of course not. It was guaranteed to work from the beginning. If you check out any song of hers, please have it be this one. There's something to like for everyone in this recording, and it is her signature song. And it's not even the best part. There's an entire album to go along with it. I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You is the lead single. Interestingly, it does a callback to the song Running Out of Fools, which is kinda neat. Soul Serenade is the first use of electric piano in her songs. What a way to introduce an instrument. Don't Let Me Lose This Dream has an interesting sonic choice of combining bossa nova with Aretha's trademark vocals and backing singers. Aretha wrote this one along with Baby Baby Baby, Save Me, and Do Right Woman, Do Right Man, which is a testament to how she was finding her voice and had a lot more creative control than at Columbia. Despite the auto-tune instruments, that last song has retroactively become one of her best-known songs. Her husband had a few writing credits too, like on Dr. Feelgood, Love is a Serious Business. Good Times is her first blues song in a while. And one note I took on this album is that this is basically what she's been doing for the last few albums, just with no orchestra and marketed better and with more creative control. Drown in My Own Tears would have fit nicely on any of her earlier records. The last song I haven't mentioned is The Change Is Gonna Come, written by Sam Cooke, but truly perfected by Aretha. This is probably the version of the civil rights anthem that you know, or have at least heard before. Shout out to the vibraphone work. You know what other artists made multiple albums in 1967 whom I've also covered? The Doors. With these artists' respective albums of 1967, both artists have done a similar thing. The second album showgirl from the first album of that year, from many covers to many originals. They both show a maturation in sound. I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You was released on March 10th, 1967. It shot to the top of the R&B 200, and so did Respect on the singles chart. This album even got to number 2 in Canada and the same position on the Hot 200, but was kept from number 1 by none other than More from the Monkees. Yes, that's the album from 1967 that I picture when I think of achievements in music that deserve the number 1 spot more than this Aretha record. Respect became an anthem of second wave feminism and the civil rights movement, and since the release of I Never Loved the Man the Way I Love You, it has been certified gold by the RIAA. Between now and her next album, she toured around the eastern US. Unfortunately, during a concert in Florida, she shattered her right elbow, which caused a delay in the making of her next album. With the newfound success from experimenting and giving her so much more creative license, by the Summer of Love, fans and Atlantic executives alike were clamoring for a new Aretha album, so she wrote and curated a few more songs and had more recording sessions to produce a follow-up. The opener is the cover of the Rolling Stones hit Satisfaction, being different from the original in both tone and instrumentation. You Are My Sunshine is so different from the source song, and if it weren't for the title, I wouldn't have been able to tell that it was a cover. Being the workhorse she was, she played the piano on the song with one hand because of her shattered elbow, despite doctor's orders. Never Let Me Go, Prove It, Nightlife, That's Life, I Wonder, and Going Down Slow proves she can still sing waltzes. 96 Tears, Ain't Nobody Gonna Turn Me Around, and Baby I Love You are up-tempo songs. They sound fine. About the album, we've seen it many times, both before and after Aretha, where artists will botch attempts to follow up their mainstream breakthrough due to pressure to succeed or the desire to have more success quicker. This one feels rushed, the cover choices seem to be pandering, and there are no Aretha originals. The songs by themselves are fine, miles better than any of the filler tracks from her earlier albums, especially Baby I Love You, but the whole project feels like it's less than the sum of its parts. Q Magazine says it's the most forgettable follow-up to a great album. Aretha Arrives was released on August 4th, 1967. No one cares what I think, because this album got to number 1 on the R&B chart, number 5 on the Hot 100, and number 15 in Canada. Between now and her next album, she performed many times all over the United States, even with a bum elbow. After all of this commercial success, Atlantic and her legions of new fans wanted more. She and the Muscle Shoals rhythm section had already put down all the songs on this album by the time the demand was high. Opener Chain of Fools is one of her most well-known hits, In the vein of Respect, it is a powerful and soulful attempt to call out players. Utilizing only one chord, it demands attention for the narrator. Money Won't Change You was another showcase of the Motown sound on Atlantic Records. People Get Ready is her first gospel song in a while. Nikki Hokey is her first funk song. She should keep doing that more often. And the lyrics are very, very interesting. Good to Me As I Am to You is my second favorite track from this record. Everyone's playing themselves up really high. The entire song is basically a bass solo with Aretha's vocals on top, and none other than Eric Clapton on guitar. Groovin', made famous by the Rascals, is on here, and it's nice. Sweet Sweet Baby, Since You've Been Gone, and Comeback Baby are both fine in their own rights, but nothing special. As for jazzy closer, Ain't No Way, I've been emotionally hardened by too many things in my life to receive chills from listening to a song, but you just may experience them when listening. But the best song on this album, and the best in her entire discography, is You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman.
Looking out on the morning rain.
She has a deep and convicting vocal delivery, paired with stellar orchestration, all underscored by a great Tommy Cogwheel bass line. I absolutely love the backup singers. Written by Carole King, What's Not to Love, and clearly she loved her own song because she went on to record it on one of the best-selling albums of all time, Tapestry. If you like Respect when I recommended it, you'd best check out this one. I don't care how early in the video I'm saying this, it is her best album. Lady Soul was released on January 22nd, 1968. Everyone agrees with me this time because this album got to number 2 on the Hot 200, her highest charting album ever. It got to number 1 on the R&B chart, of course, but it even proved to have international success, getting to number 18 in West Germany. It was supported by the top 20 singles, Chain of Fools, Ain't No Way, Since You've Been Gone, and You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. That last song became another feminist anthem, and Lady Soul eventually would be certified gold. On February 16th, Aretha was awarded the STLC Drum Beat Musicians Award by fellow civil rights activist Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whom she knew quite well. Between now and her next album, she played 2 dates in the US before embarking on her first ever world tour to promote Lady Soul, singing at shows in the Netherlands, Sweden, West Germany, France, and the UK.
Because you make me feel, you make me feel like a natural woman.
She recorded an entire other album before the tour of Europe and put it out right after it ended. The goal of this one was to once again make a follow-up to a successful album. Think is the first lead single of hers that she wrote and has performed exceptionally well. This is a good song and it's no surprise that people bought it. Another feminist anthem, it was later featured in the 1980 film Blues Brothers. I Say a Little Prayer is another Burt Bacharach ditty. I like the key and time signature changes and how some of the lead vocals are carried by the backup singers. I Can't See Myself Leaving You is another big single and one of my favorites. Unfortunately, the rest of this album is average. Seesaw, Nighttime is the Right Time, You Send Me, You're a Sweet Man, I Take What I Want, Hello Sunshine, and Change all suffer from being just another Aretha song. The record in total feels like it was created to be the next Aretha album, with a few good songs and not much else. Nothing about this album deserves to be hated, but it is played safe, and there's no replay value outside of the 2 songs everyone knows. Of course, this is during a time where only having good singles is all you need, so the album did climb to number 1 on the R&B charts, number 3 in the Hot 200, and even had some international appeal, as it got to number 12 in Canada, number 26 in West Germany, and number 6 in the UK. It did go on to be certified gold. Between now and her next album, she played many shows in the US, as well as 1 in West Germany and 10 shows in Caracas, Venezuela. Those Paris performances from the year before were released as a live album, Aretha in Paris, during this time. prolific as usual, Aretha churned out 2 albums in 1969. For the first time in a while, she wanted it to be a collection of jazz standards and a few newer songs with similar presentation. Soul 69 opens with Ramblin', an interesting look into the classic swing feel. Today I Sing the Blues is a re-record of the song from Aretha 61, but with better production and general sound. Pitiful has that element of interplay absent from the last few albums. Bring It On Home to Me is a more upbeat version of that Sam Cooke song. Tracks of My Tears has many different instruments on it and a key change too. As for River's Invitation, Crazy He Calls Me, If You Gotta Make a Fool of Somebody, Gentle on My Mind, So Long and Elusive Butterfly, they are more reminiscent of her Columbia sound. This is a retread, but at least she had the creative freedom to do so. This is also sadly the last album of hers for a while to feature bassist Tommy Cogbill, as well as many other members of the Muscle Shoals Rhythm section because they became their own band. Soul 69 was released on January 17, 1969. At this point, people would buy anything with the name Aretha on it, so it got to number 1 on the R&B 200 chart, number 15 on the Hot 200, number 15 in Canada, number 9 in the UK. Between now and her next album, she performed once in Michigan. So we've seen that Aretha has been very successful over the past 2 years and 5 albums. I bet Columbia really regrets not giving her more creative breathing room, because she sure made Atlantic a lot of money. But wait, Columbia still owns some songs by her, and the rights to distribute them. They could get a lot of money too! So, good old Columbia decided to come out with their own Aretha album once again, simply because they could. All of these were recorded around the same time as Unforgettable, way back in 1964. Opener Only the Lonely has the more relaxed jazz standard sound from Columbia, even though she's done this sound 1,000 times before, and just revisited it on Soul 69. This same sound profile continues on I Wish I Didn't Love You, Shangri-La, My Coloring Book, Jim, Friendly Persuasion, The I Love, But Beautiful, and Closer People. The 2 best songs are the following. On When the World Was Young, it's just her and a piano, and A Mother's Love, which already appeared on Soul Sister, but the soft and beautiful version is better. Despite that, this is still just another B-sides record. It does deliver on the promise of the title, but is incredibly one note. The 5 before this were all some varying degree of good, which is very hard to pull off as a musician, to make 5 quality albums in a row. Although those albums did have filler tracks and weird choices, she managed to keep things sounding fresh throughout those projects. Being that this is a money grab, this album is plagued with bad judgment, obviously one of these being releasing it in the first place. All the bad judgment here is on Columbia's part, like putting Only the Lonely and I Wish I Didn't Love You right next to each other, even though they're in the same key, G major. This album truly did not need to be made, and it's even more of a cash grab than Take It Like You Give It. Soft and Beautiful was released on April 1st, 1969. It got to number 29 on the R&B chart. Between now and her next album, she performed a few times in the States, one of these being at the 41st Academy Awards. She also divorced Ted White on account of his domestic abuse and occasional overprotectiveness, leaving her brother Cecil Franklin to take up the managerial role. She also received the Académie du Jazz Award for her 3 most recent albums, but the weirdest thing to happen during this time was an impersonation scheme. The impersonator's name was Vicki Jones, performing around Florida. However, if you look a bit deeper into this, you can actually see that she had been basically forced into impersonation from A Deal Gone Wrong. Vicki Jones was cleared of charges once the courts looked into the situation, and she had her own career, and someone tried to impersonate her. What you sow comes around. Play stupid games, you get the horns. With liberation comes peace of mind. At least that's what I tell myself. Having gotten out of her marriage, Aretha was now feeling more free than ever. So the now 27-year-old went into the studio to record songs off of this new feeling of being free. Son of a Preacher Man is a good opener. You probably know Dusty Springfield's version of it more. Let It Be and Eleanor Rigby are Beatles covers. Yes, this means that Aretha was one of the first artists that was allowed to cover the Beatles, but I would call them more interpretations than covers. Let It Be has a different key signature, and her usual vocal improvisations in the saxophone solo is superbs. The Beatles hadn't even released this song yet, but they sent her a demo to work with. Obviously, the Let It Be album version by the Beatles is the best, but this is definitely the second best. The other Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby, originally released 4 years earlier, doesn't even resemble the original. The chords, the melody, and even some of the lyrics have been changed. Can this really be called a cover? This Girl's in Love With You was written by, wait for it, Burt Bacharach! It's fine. It's all about love, you know, Burt. Remarkably, Duane Allman of the Allman Brothers plays guitar on 2 songs here. The first is It Ain't Fair, and the other is her cover of The Weight by the band. This is exactly what you think a cover of The Weight by Aretha Franklin with Duane Allman on guitar would sound like. It's fine, except there's this notable distortion on her voice. It's off-putting because her voice on nearly every track out of her oeuvre is clean and pure. Call Me is the only song on this album penned by Aretha. It apparently was inspired by hearing a couple talking to each other. It's a heartwarming listen. The other 3 songs, Share Your Love With Me, Dark End of the Street, and Sit Down and Cry, show a turn in the more soulful direction. With all factors like these writers, covers, and guests, this is her best album since Lady Soul, and a great way to kick off the sizzle in 70s. This Girl's in Love With You was released on January 16th, 1970. The singles Eleanor Rigby, Share Your Love With Me, and Call Me received airplay like crazy. The album got to number 17 on the Hot 200, number 2 on the R&B chart, number 8 in Australia, number 18 in Canada. Between now and her next album, she performed a handful of shows in Illinois before flying over to Europe to sing in Italy, France, and the UK. She also had a child that would be her last. At the same time as the This Girl sessions, Aretha was also working on a forward-thinking album, one that would incorporate diverse instrumentation, and she would also write much of it. Opener Don't Play That Song is the first song to have a harpsichord. It's pretty good, and it was the lead single. If I ever do a cover of an Aretha song, it will be this one, because among other reasons, it has a sick bass line. Spirit in the Dark is written by Aretha, and it is the best song on this album. I love the ambiguous at first but suddenly drastic tempo change. The Thrill Is Gone from Yesterday's Kiss is both a cover of B.B. King and the ultimate breakup diss to Ted White. Honest I Do, When the Battle Is Over, That's All I Want From You, Oh No Not My Baby, and Why I Sing the Blues are all distinguished from her music so far with their diverse instrumentation, with soul, funk, rock, jazz, and other stylings throughout. Pulling You and Me, One Way Ticket, and Try Maddies are all written by Aretha. Through all these various compositions, this album is distinguished by its bluesy sound, which makes sense in the wake of a divorce. It is just as good as This Girl's in Love With You. Spirit in the Dark was released on August 24th, 1970, and was her 17th album in 10 years. It got to number 25 on the Hot 200, as well as the Australian chart. It got to number 2 on the R&B chart. Between now and her next album, she performed at Fillmore East in New York and Fillmore West in Los Angeles. The performance at Fillmore West would be made into her 3rd live album. It eventually went gold. In 1971, she sang a cover of Bridge Over Troubled Water at the 13th Grammys, where she won the Best Female Vocal R&B Performance Award with Don't Play That Song. She then flew over to Italy for one concert before coming right back to America for a few more. She then flew back over to Switzerland to perform even more live shows there and in Italy. She then came back to the US with even more shows that year, one being at a pavilion in Stanford University. Nothing special happened here, I just thought it was interesting that she performed once on a college campus. Given how busy she was, 1971 would be the first year without an Aretha album since her career began in 1960. 10 days before her next album came out, she performed 2 different set lists over 2 different days at New Temple Missionary Baptist Church in Los Angeles. The set list was absolutely packed with classics and many new songs. A lot of people attended, including Keith Richards of Rolling Stones fame. Before she went out on tour, Aretha recorded yet another album in the studio. This is the peak of her hard work. This one would be a full return to soul music and minimalist instrumentation. Oh Me Oh My, I'm a Fool For You Baby shows a greater focus on just having a few musicians. This minimalist approach is continued on A Brand New Me, I've Been Loving You Too Long, and Didn't I Blow Your Mind This Time. Daydreaming stands out solely because of that slow, airy ending. Rock Steady is her first funk song with funk production as opposed to Nicky Hokey. It's written by her, and it was rightfully selected as the lead single. Young, Gifted, and Black starts out as a very slow gospel song with mainly just voices and piano, then it picks up to be slightly faster with funk production. First Snow in Kokomo is a very, very interesting song. If you ever listen to it, you should listen to it with the lyrics on screen while you're listening to it. It is a trip. The Long and Winding Road is a cover of a song by the Beatles. This is a pretty alright cover. It adds a new early 70s soul perspective on the song, albeit very little else. All the King's Horses utilizes a Celesta, and the one song that isn't minimalist is April Fool's with its orchestra. Given the title, this may be on purpose. Border's song Holy Moses is an Elton John cover. It compares nicely. Young, Gifted, and Black was released on January 24th, 1972. Rocksteady climbed to number 2 on the R&B chart and number 9 on the Hot 100, proving that she could still make successful singles. The album got to number 2 on the R&B chart, number 11 on the Hot 100, and number 53 in Australia. It eventually went gold. Between now and her next album, she performed a handful of times in the States. You know what else happened during this time? Oh, nothing, just the pinnacle of her career. Remember those concerts in the church she performed a year back? That came out as a live album, Amazing Grace. There were many factors that played into the success of this particular live album over the others, and even all of her studio output. There was a lot of intersectionality between feminism and Black is Beautiful, and the US was in a reflective mood in the wake of the Vietnam War's tipping point. My favorite track from this one is the 10-minute version of Amazing Grace. It was a smash hit upon release, getting to number 2 on the R&B chart, number 7 on the Hot 100, number 23 in Canada, and even number 42 in Japan. It went on to be certified double platinum, and it is her most certified recording in her history.
How sweet
You know what labels give artists when they just hit the jackpot with a wildly successful double album? Creative freedom, more than ever. On this venture, Aretha was aiming for an experimental, progressive, and enjoyable album. Did she get it? We'll find out. Hey Now Hey, The Other Side of the Sky, which she wrote, is a well-written opener with many different tempo changes and builds, incorporating the different sounds she's known for at this point, and Tabby Cogbill, my personal hero, returns to play bass on this album. She breaks 6 minutes with her version of Somewhere from West Side Story. I may have gotten more flashbacks to Laughing on the Outside with the constant waltzes in C major, but the song does more than make up for it, with a fading in and out of the orchestra to change the atmosphere to be just a small jazz group, and then back into a full orchestral ballad. I love the saxophone solo. Angel, written by her sister Carolyn, may be the most soulful number yet, with the saxophone solo and an organ solo. And that key change from C to D is legendary. Mr. Spain is a slow song over 6 minutes. It's very lyrically dense. The highest compliment I can give it is that it was rewarding to the ears of a musician, but I don't know, maybe you, the viewer, should hear this for yourself. Not only does she break 6 minutes on this album, she breaks 7 minutes with That's the Way I Feel About Ya. This song reminds me of the production of Steely Dan, that's a good thing here, and also she had a little bit of beef with them because they said something about her.
A19, that's Aretha Franklin. She don't remember Queen of Soul.
But it wasn't really that offensive, so I don't know what her problem was. We'll never know. So Swell When You're Well and Sister from Texas are even more funky, just not fully there yet. Moody's mood is short and fast, and it shows her in her playful spirit. If it weren't for Spotify lyric feature, I wouldn't know what she's singing.
This little dream I'm dreaming about it. There I go, dropping straight out of my head again. Oh baby, won't you come and put our two hearts together? It would make us strong and great. Whoa, and we're whoa, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid. If there's a cloud up above us, gonna let her rain to us together to do her thing.
And finally, Closer Just Right Tonight is her longest song yet. The intro alone is 3.5 minutes, taking advantage of dynamic building of expectations, and Billy Preston makes a guest appearance on the piano here. Quincy Jones is on the studio controls this time as well. This album is a great accomplishment in production, composition, and sheer audacity. No other R&B singer was doing anything like this at the time. The themes of Afrocentrism are present, and the music is progressive, both musically and politically. The one word I would use to describe this project is statement. This album would also sadly be her final with Tommy Cogbill, for real this time. Hey Now Hey, The Other Side of the Sky was released on June 25th, 1973. It warranted 2 top 10 R&B singles that were only top 40 singles on the Hot 100. Due to the uncompromising nature of this record, it didn't cross over well and had 0 foreign appeal. It did get to number 30 on the Hot 100 and number 2 on the R&B chart. Between now and her next album, she performed many times in the US, including a 7-night residency at the Latin Club in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. She also met a really young Whitney Houston around this time through her friendship with Cissy Houston, Whitney's mother. Cissy was a versatile and prominent singer in the eastern United States. She would even provide backing vocals to Aretha in future releases. Aretha was even made Whitney's honorary aunt. During the Hey Now Hey press cycle, she recorded another one. Atlantic basically told her there wasn't enough international appeal and suggested tapping fully into funk and more danceable music because the club scene was growing. Let Me In Your Life, Every Natural Thing, I'm in Love, Until You Come Back to Me, That's What I'm Gonna Do, and 8 Days on the Road are danceable, funky, and groovy. The Masquerade Is Over is a neat callback to her early jazz songs. Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing and With Pen in Hand are slow orchestral songs. 2 songs are originals this time, these ones being Oh Baby and If You Don't Think. A Song For You is a fine closer with its 1-minute intro with dual electric piano and organ, and its dynamic building over its 5-minute runtime. Outside of the greater percentage of funk songs, she doesn't really try anything new on this record, and the greatest feeling given off here is transitional. Many people must have believed not fixing something that wasn't broken because it got to number 17 on the Hot 200, number 88 in Australia, and number 15 in Canada. It soared to number 1 on the R&B chart, and between now and her next album, she performed a few times in the eastern US. Well, we're now on to the bandwagon era of her career. From here on out, she will try on many different sounds to see which one fits her the best, and more importantly, brings her success. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but her popularity is dwindling in this ever-changing musical landscape of the 1970s. An album with a few funk tracks just wasn't going to cut it. She pretty much had to adopt this new sound that many musicians like her were doing. She does try to keep things fresh, like on the opener, Without Love, which is the first incorporation of a synthesizer in her music. When you get right down to it, I love every little thing about you, sing it again, say it again, and don't go breaking my heart. No, not that one. Our standard danceable funk numbers. I like how at the end of You'll Never Get to Heaven, everything but her vocals fade out. On With Everything I Feel in Me, there's a lot more lyrical freedom demonstrated by her, like saying the word sexy. The epic and soulful closing pair of All of These Things and You Move Me are the best songs here. Also, if you read the titles of the songs in order, it sounds like a sentence. Pause the video here to do that. With Everything I Feel on Me was released on November 25th, 1974, exactly 10 months after Let Me In Your Life. This would be the last time multiple Aretha albums would be out within 1 year. It got to number 6 on the R&B chart, but only number 57 on the Hot 200. Between now and her next album, she sang at venues around the US, including the 17th Grammys and the 47th Oscars. Remember Jerry Wexler, the Atlantic executive and producer who coined the term rhythm and blues, who was Aretha's mentor and convinced her to join Atlantic in the first place, who got the Musical Executive of the Year award in 1967 for redirecting her career? He straight up left Atlantic. Maybe it was because of Aretha's stale career, or because he failed in an attempt to integrate the label into Nashville, but in any case, he was gone, and he would do freelance work working with Bob Dylan in his Born Again phase, and later Dire Straits and George Michael. Aretha had already recorded this by the time he left, though. Mr. DJ, Five for the DJ, is a strong opener with its fast tempo and call and response horn break, especially since its premise is that she wants to give DJs a break by giving them a long song, except for the song itself isn't even 5 minutes long like the title suggests. It only happens when I look at you, you make my life, the Shala Bandit, and you got all the aces. Do funk better, maybe because Wexler himself and Aretha produced this together. There are some slow songs where she lets the orchestra come back. I'm Not Strong Enough to Love You Again, Walk Softly, You, and As Long as You Are There are slower. Without You is my personal favorite from this album. I love the use of the soprano saxophone and the bass line too. And not this whole album really. As a bass player, I would have played these exact bass lines if I were given these songs. You was released on October 16th, 1975, to muted slow claps of approval, got to number 83 on the Hot 200 and number 9 on the R&B chart. Between now and her next album, she performed twice at Carnegie Hall. That's right, she finally figured out how to get to Carnegie. Turns out, it was practicing all along. In 1976, Sam Osteen was making a film called Sparkle about a fictional 60s early group called Sister and the Sisters that is driven to break up because of issues that all three members face. It was decided that none other than Aretha Franklin should provide the soundtrack. How about those songs? There was waning variety in her songs on this album before this one, so... Is there diversity here? Of course there's dichotomy. There's the slow songs, like Something He Can Feel, Look Into Your Heart, and I Get High, and the faster funky songs, like Hooked on Your Love, Jump, and Loving You Baby. Wait, you said diversity? Yep, that's what I said. Freaking ears checked. While she and the various groups of backup singers work just fine and she sings her heart out like always, this collection gives off a uniquely karaoke vibe. The one song that isn't slow or funky is Rock With Me, which is more swing oriented. This whole thing is short and at some points it feels like it was created under contractual obligation. Sparkle, the album, was released on May 27, 1976, alongside Sparkle, the movie. This picture had a theme of black empowerment and a nostalgic look on the world about 15 years before the creation of the film. This album was somewhat of a comeback for Aretha, as it did get to number 18 on the Hot 200, number 58 in Canada, and number 1 on the R&B chart. It did eventually go gold, but it would be her last for a long, long time. Between now and her next album, she performed several times in the US, including 2 separate runs of shows at the Painters Mill Music Fair and 3 shows in the Erie Crown Theater in Chicago. She even sang God Bless America at Jimmy Carter's inauguration. Los Angeles became her new home during this time as well. Now, unlike the monetary contract with Columbia, the one she signed with Atlantic Records was an album over time based one. It called for 1 album per year, as was a standard for musicians at the time. 1971 was supplemented by the live album at Fillmore West. Atlantic was quite progressive and paid fairly though, so she couldn't just leave them if she didn't want to keep making music every year. And since Sparkle was a bigger success than she had seen in years, maybe, just maybe, she could stage a comeback. Open or Break It To Me, Gently, is the lead single. My opinion is positive, especially since the song is a combination of all the sounds she tried before this, taking in the orchestra of her early days, backup singers and groups of her time in the late 60s, the gospel deviations she sprinkled throughout her career, and the danceable funk of her 70s output thus far. When I Think About You, No One Could Ever Love You More, A Tender Touch, and Sunshine Will Never Be the Same uphold this combo. What I Did for Love, it was much like the other slow songs we know her for, except it has a key change, which is not common at all in her music. Touch Me Up marks the first use of a clavinet in Aretha's music. Meadows of Springtime, written by Aretha herself, is a great song incorporating spoken word, a full orchestra, a vocoder on the guitar, and a duration of over 5 minutes, which add up to make this song epic. There's no other way to describe it. Mumbles / I've Got the Music in Me is a good time. It's mainly built off vocal improvisation, a lot of it being scat singing, the art of saying words that don't exist.
Ugh, the neighbors are having a party with loud jazz music. Well, at least annoyingly scatting over jazz hasn't been invented yet. Oh, that must have been invented today!
Sweet Passion is entirely written by Aretha herself, and it takes time introducing new musical ideas until it fades out after 7 minutes. Sweet Passion was released on May 19th of 1977. It is worth noting here that this album has the highest percentage of self-penned songs in her discography. The single Break It To Me Gently did fine, getting to number 1 on the R&B chart, but in 1977, the type of music she was creating was starting to become too soft for the ever-changing musical tastes. Sweet Passion clambered up to number 49 on the Hot 200 and number 6 on the R&B chart. That comeback didn't really happen. Between now and her next album, she performed a handful of times, including 2 in Paris, 1 at the 50th Oscars. 2 days before the next record came out, she married actor Glenn Turman. Aretha decided to try again, this time seeking help from legendary songwriter and producer Curtis Mayfield to flesh out the project. On songs like Almighty Fire, Women of the Future, Lady Lady, More Than Just a Joy, Keep on Loving You, I Needed You Baby, Close to You, No Matter Who You Love, and This You Can Believe, she takes sonic cues from Gloria Gaynor, showing a return to orchestral arrangements with less moody and more upbeat vibes, tapping into the disco scene once again. I'm Your Speed is my favorite. It's the only one she wrote. It's just her voice and a piano playing on the higher notes the whole time, with her contributing backing vocals at the same volume, creating an echoing effect. It creates this desperate but intimate atmosphere, and it's the only one not written by Curtis Mayfield. While his writing is acceptable and his production is adequate, they're just that. And I know that he did other better things before and after this, but this is definitely a low point in his career. Almighty Fire was released on April 13th, 1978. Maybe it's because of that eye-burning, god-awful cover that it only got to number 68 in the US and Canada, and number 12 on the R&B charts, being her worst charting since B-sides Cash Grab, Soft and Beautiful. The single More Than Just a Joy and Almighty Fire were given lukewarm reception. Between now and her next album, she performed quite a bit around the US, with 4 more dates at Carnegie Hall included. Another date was at Latin Hotel and Casino. While she was playing there, 4 men entered Reverend C.L. Franklin, her father's home. He attempted to outsmart them by surprising them and running them out of his home. When he jumped out to scare the intruders, in the confusion, one of them shot him twice in the groin. He fell into a 6-month coma after that. To say this stunned Aretha, Detroit, or even the entire soul community would be an understatement. Remember, he was the reason that she got started recording music in the first place. You can bet she wasn't quite feeling herself after her mentor, advocate, and brief manager was all but dead. So she took a long break in between albums to reflect, even though she had already recorded the songs you see here. This time, she sought assistance from producer and songwriter Van McCoy. You might remember his huge hit, The Hustle.
It's the Okomatic, the only tree with its own remote. Summer, autumn, winter, and disco.
Mom.
Come on, Ted, get into it. Dance with the tree.
Oh, it hurts, Mom. Please stop.
Because of his storied background, there's plenty of musical diversity to be found here. Ladies Only is a very strong opener, starting off slowly, then unpredictably changing to a faster song with disco production. Then she starts speaking in French out of nowhere. What If I Should Ever Need You is my favorite slow song of hers from this late 70s era Aretha. I love the full choir in the background and the dynamic buildup of this song. It adds so much. Honey, I Need Your Love has more of a swing to it, and it's gonna get a bit better as standard disco fare with horn flourishes throughout its duration. Reasons Why, Half a Love, and The Feeling follow in this step. Only Sorrow's a Song. This is the most filler song I've ever heard. You Brought Me Back to Life was written by Van as well, and this is a truly beautiful song. My second favorite song here is I Was Made for You. It is the first ever artist feature on an album of hers. It's a duet with, you guessed it, Van McCoy. Speaking of him, he died only 2 months after this album was mastered. This was, unfortunately, his final project. La Diva was released 2 months after that on September 6, 1979. Overall, this album's very enjoyable and nice to listen to, and the production's fine with its late 70s charm, but the charts do not reflect this. It only got to number 146 in the Hot 100 and number 25 on the R&B chart. Between now and her next album, she got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She also performed on The Mike Douglas Show, wearing the dress from the cover. It proved that, yes, she was still making music, to anyone who didn't know already. Because of her stale career, she made the tough decision to leave Atlantic after 12 years. Clive Davis offered Aretha a spot on his label Arista, one of Sony's 4 biggest labels, with the goal of bringing new life into this body of work, as Jerry Wexler had done 12 years before. When she left Atlantic, she got to keep the rights to the last 5 albums, which is why all releases from With Everything I Feel in Me up to La Diva, with the exception of Sparkle, are not available on streaming, as she never licensed them to be on any platform. I had to go on YouTube and listen to HQ vinyl rips for this part. With another attempt at a comeback in mind, she also got into acting.
I'll have some toasted white bread, please.
Her screen debut was the 1980 film The Blues Brothers.
The Blues Brothers? Shit.
They still owe you money, fool.
She plays Mrs. Murphy, the owner of a soul food restaurant, and her talent carries over well to the screen. They gave her roughly 7 minutes of screen time and a great character to play, which is the production team's way of paying their dues to the Queen of Soul herself.
Oh, shut up, woman.
You better think about what you're trying to do to me, yeah, think.
In a manner that seems all too familiar, she wanted to make an album to warrant another explosion in popularity and relevancy. With a complete change of label, it was looking closer than ever, so she handed production duties over to the Arista producers Chuck Jackson and R.F. Martin. So now the 38-year-old Aretha recorded new songs in the studio with as much of a forward-thinking mindset as possible. Going into this new decade, it is important to remember just what kinds of instrumentation, production, and arrangement are being put into R&B music now. What am I talking about? The answer to that can be heard from listening to one song, Open or Come to Me. It has full-blown 80s production with tiny pianos, reverb, stock Yamaha synths, reverb, side sticks, reverb, orchestra, reverb! Unite Together and Together Again also utilized this production choice. I Can't Turn You Loose is a cover of the Otis Redding song. If you ever wanted to hear that song sung by Aretha Franklin with 80s production, here it is. It was also kind of a tie-in with the Blues Brothers movie, because this is what they use as their introductory music. There's also a great variety of solo instruments on this album, like the flute on Take Me With You, the glockenspiel on Whatever It Is, and the early soul-inspired organ and distorted guitar on Love Me Forever. School Days has the least of the 80s production, incorporating a fast oompa beat and full brass swing section, but the song from this album worth mentioning the most is their funked up version of the Doobie Brothers' What a Fool Believes. This is a good cover, especially since it's in the same key as the original. There's a dance break in it, hinting at what she may do in her future 80s output. In short, this album is a huge step up from her last 7 years of work. I look forward to listening to this album given her recent output before this, but by the end I was tapping my foot. Aretha was released on September 30th, 1980. This is her second release under this name, which is why I call it Aretha 80. After the year, it got to number 47 on the Hot 200 and number 6 in the R&B chart, outperforming the last three. The single United Together got to number 56 on the Hot 100 and number 3 on the R&B chart. What a Fool Believes even cracked the top 40 of the dance chart, which was an untapped market for her. This is something to write home about. Between now and her next album, she performed 4 times. Once in London, once at Summerfest 81, once at Chicago Fest 81, and once on Saturday Night Live. And in a true full circle moment, she sang I Can't Turn You Loose on that show. For the first time in 13 years, the general public was interested in Aretha. So, she sought out to make a successor, and this time she was going to try her best to make a follow-up that wasn't forgettable, learning from the last 2 times. She even brought in guests like David Foster, Marcus Miller, Jeff Porcaro, Rod Temperton, Darlene Love, and Sissy Houston to realize this goal. Let's see if this went through. Love All the Hurtaways, their second duet. This song has even more 80s production elements, like instead of dipping the song in reverb, it was dunked in a bucket of reverb. Also, the guitar has chorus now. Search On, Whole Lot of Me, and Kind of Man continue with the song clean. Hold On I'm Comin' is a funky cover of the famous 1966 single by Sam and Dave. Noticeably, there are sounds of people talking, dancing, and cheering in the background, and it gives off this block party atmosphere. Living in the Streets is interesting purely because it features the first gapless transition on an album of hers that isn't a live album. It transitions into There's a Star for Everyone, which serves as a great energetic contrast to Living in the Streets' upbeat tempo as it is a powerful ballad. All of the musical cues are on point with the sonic atmosphere she was going for. You Can't Always Get What You Want is another cover of a Rolling Stones song that is made funkier. The guitar solo is pretty good in this dance break, which may be further hinting at something to come in the future. Her version of It's My Turn is pretty slow, and has a victorious fade out, during which it transitions into Truth and Honesty, which is more danceable. Love All the Hurtaway was released on August 20th, 1981. It got to number 36 in the US, number 4 on the R&B chart, and the floodgates were open once again for a stream of success. Hold On I'm Comin' was moderately successful, getting to number 53 for dance songs. Between now and her next album, she performed in the US a few times, including a residency at the Roxy, most of the locations of the Budweiser Superfest, and the 82 Cotton Bowl.
Jump, jump, jump to it. Jump, jump, jump to it.
The appeal of Love That Hurt Away was not to be unnoticed. With how widely appreciated within the dance charts some of her songs were, Aretha and the people at Arista decided to make a full dance album, hoping to stir up some success through that chart. So she brought on famed R&B producer Luther Vandross to make it work. For guests, many of them from the previous album are also here, like Marcus Miller. Jump To It is undeniably dance-oriented. The intro alone is 2 minutes long, focusing on dance breaks, showing that this is truly her complete turn to breakbeat, a type of disco music that is defined by having extended breaks of songs to dance to. Her vocals take a backseat to the rhythm and intention of the music, which is purely dance. What I mean by this is that people will be dancing to the familiar voice of someone they've known for 20 or so years. When you're familiar with a voice, it's comforting, and it's so much fun to dance with a friend who's singing, and that's why this part of her career works so well. The songs that aren't slow ballads have a lot of emphasis on dance breaks like this one. Also, there are bongos to tie this enjoyable song together, and I will never be able to get that catchy refrain of jump, jump, jump to it out of my head. Lovely Right is the first time she's used a chorus of male backup singers rather than female, and do you know who they are? They're none other than the Four Tops. If You Don't Want Your Lovin', It's Just Your Love, and Just a Daydream continue the 80s production, but also are more reminiscent of her late 60s output, creating this hybrid that only she could pull off and not have it sound like the most pandering, cheesy production you've ever heard. This is shown through instrumentation, like how the drums don't have heavy reverb, among a greater focus on piano. This is for real serves as a reminder of how versatile her voice is. She does really well when singing softly and slowly. I Want to Make It Up to You is a fine duet written by Aretha, and it fades out, then it fades back in before ending for real. Her version of It's Your Thing by the Isley Brothers is a neat callback to the late 60s, and she even shows her progressive side by throwing in some bars of 9/4 time signature. This is a fantastic album. I haven't had very much to say about the last few, given that her music speaks for itself and all, but Jump To It is what you want from an artist trying to break beat sound. I did get the urge to spin around on my floor once or twice during this journey. There aren't that many tracks, because they're all pretty long, yet no track overstays its welcome. Jump To It was released on July 26, 1982. It debuted at number 1 on the R&B chart and got to number 23 on the Hot 100. It did go on to be certified gold, and the title track got to number 24 on the Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart, and it would be her last number 1 album ever. As expected, it also reached number 4 on the dance singles chart. Looks like she did her research into dance songs. Between now and her next album, she performed the remaining dates at the Budweiser Superfest, 4 times at Beverly Theater in LA, twice at the Valley Forge Music Fair, once at the Jamaican World Music Festival, and a few other assorted dates in the US. On one of the flights between these dates, she experienced a particularly bumpy ride and developed a fear of flight. While she was achieving new heights never seen before in her career, her father's condition had worsened so much that she had to move back to Detroit from LA to take care of him. She also began experiencing weight problems. Okay, before we get into this, I just want to step back for a second and take a look at the title of this album and how it compares to the last one. They're both a reflection of her shift in this musical style. Jump To It. This means that she has jumped at the chance to make music for a select group of people. The kind of people that go out late at night and party, even if it's in the middle of the road. Now that she's jumped to it, it's time for her to get it right. She tried really hard to make a good follow-up to Jump To It. In fact, she gave all writing and production duty to Luther Vandross and Marcus Miller for this album. Spoiler alert, this is her most forgettable 80s album. Here are the things I did remember. Get It Right, Pretender, and I Got Your Love are perfect breakbeat. When You Love Me Like That, Better Friends and Lovers, and my personal favorite, I Wish It Would Rain, are typical standard slow 80s songs. Every Girl Wants My Guy is great solely because she says totally tubular.
He is so totally tubular.
And Closer, Giving In, was written by her father, Clarence Franklin, and it seems to me that this was included as a preemptive tribute to her dad. So, yeah, this album is forgettable, like I said before. All of this exploring is mostly to no avail. I did like the song I Wish It Would Rain because of the rain sounds with a soft and soaring voice, but aside from that, I can barely even remember if I heard this at all. Get It Right was released on July 14th, 1983. For some context, these are the voices ruling the charts at this time, and there is something to be said about how she was up to the steep competition and how she was willing to put out music in a time like this, during this year of rising stars. It performed the exact same numbers as Love All the Hurt Away, getting to number 36 on the Hot 200 and number 4 on the R&B chart. It's a success, no doubt, albeit an obvious step down from Jump To It. It might be the in-the-moment rush of the first attempt at breakbeat that led to its outperformance. Maybe it's because they were released within a year of each other. Whatever the case was, it failed to eclipse Jump To It. that title track was just too catchy. She would not work with Luther Vandross again for a long time because of the muted reaction from fans and critics. Between now and her next album, she performed once in Ohio and once at the Budweiser Superfest '85. She took a long break from anything related to PR or music. Her father died at a nursing home in Detroit, and she also divorced Lynn Turman. 1984 would be the first year without an Aretha album since 1971, and the first without a live performance since her career began. This was clearly a time of reflection for her. It was also a time of listening. The landscape of music was ever-changing going into the mid-1980s. 1984 was spent listening, and for the last few months, tinkering around with various sounds in the studio. Many of the new songs were shipped all the way out to her from Narada Michael Walden in LA because of her fear of flight. Aretha herself said that she was striving for a younger sounding record. Right out of the starting gate, Freeway of Love is full on 80s. There's a synth bass, a vibraphone, and clapping at a length of nearly 6 minutes that accentuates dancing. It boasts a production that is uniquely 80s and her very own take on it. Until You Say You Love Me is like this as well. This album wasn't just dipped in a bucket of reverb, it was left outside while it was reverbing cats and dogs. It has the pretty genius songwriting and a saxophone solo because it's the 1980s and saxophone solos are cool again. Another Night shows how even though she was going for a younger sound, her voice is starting to show age. Sweet Bitter Love sounds like her slower songs of the 60s with its orchestra. Who's Zoomin' Who straight up uses a drum machine. Another important factor of these songs is the strongly feminist attitude she embodies here. Like on her collaboration with the Eurythmics, sisters are doing it for themselves. It's the ultimate girl boss anthem. Ain't Nobody Ever Loved You is interesting solely because of how different it sounds from literally every song of hers. It is the only song out of her entire career to have steel drums. The other guest here is Peter Wolf of Jay Giles Band fame. He sings with Aretha on Push. This album, as a whole, is a cultural collage. The cover totally sums up what it was like to live in the inner city in the 1980s, with the girl jumping rope, the couple listening to her music, and the poster of her in the center. As for the music, my opinion on this one is vastly different from the ones before this, because I like the ones that came before this because they kept the 80s production to a smaller degree, but this just feels overwhelming and like it was created to do well commercially. Even though I like 80s production, I'm not a fan of the songwriting, and I frankly think this overblown, hey, let's record everything at the other end of a basketball court approach to making music does not fit well in Aretha, or maybe I'm just fatigued, and I wonder why. It's not like I've been trying to listen to 39 albums in 1 month and have been failing miserably. Personal issues aside, Who's Zoomin' Who was released on July 9th, 1985. Despite what I've said, too much effort was put into this album for it to fail. And fail it didn't. Freeway of Love got to number 3 on the Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart, and number 1 on the dance chart, and had success in 7 other countries around the world. Who's Zoomin' Who and Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves enjoyed just as much success. Who's Zoomin' Who, the album, got to number 13 on the Hot 200, but only number 3 on the R&B chart. Can you guess which 2 groundbreaking R&B albums kept her off the number 1 spot? That's right, they were Rock Me Tonight by Freddie Jackson and Whitney Houston's self-titled album. Who's Zoomin' Who would eventually be certified platinum in the US and Canada, gold in New Zealand, and silver in the UK, proving to be an internationally accessible piece of music. Between now and her next album, she sang at the second date of Budweiser Superfest '85 and at Michigan State University, and a handful of other shows around the states. Her voice was declared to be a Michigan natural resource, right alongside cars, furniture, and beer. As proven by every other smash hit of her career, producing a follow-up to one can prove to be difficult. This time, Aretha was really gonna do it, and she got a buttload of great musicians to bolster the track list. Jimmy Lee's an energetic opener. It's in 12/8 and Kenny G plays on the song, so insta W. I Knew You Were Waiting For Me by George Michael is the duet I didn't know I was waiting for. Jumpin' Jack Flash is another Rolling Stones cover. I think her version rivals the original to an almost 1-to-1 degree, especially with the throwback sound and guitar solo, played by the Stones guitarist Keith Richards himself. Rock-A-Lot has a recognizable synth part. He'll Come Along has a full orchestra and bongos and a synth part. It's all her different eras in one. Is her duet with Larry Graham. His deep voice complements her new matured vocal technique very well. Do You Still Remember and An Angel Cries are slower songs, and Look to the Rainbow is a perfect closer with its standard style delivery, clarinet and flute features, and the drumming emphasizing beats 1 and 5 of the 3/4 time signature, and the contrapuntal bass line. I like this album much more than Who's Zoomin' Who, especially because the 80s production here, courtesy of Narada Michael Walden, but this younger sound is less forced, and the guest musician list is absolutely stacked. Aretha was released on October 17th, 1986. It got to number 32 on the Hot 200, number 7 on the R&B chart, and it fared well in 7 other countries, and it would eventually be certified gold in the US and the UK. The singles Jumpin' Jack Flash, Jimmy Lee, Rock a Lot, and If You Need My Love Tonight did alright, but her biggest hit of the entire 1980s was her duet with George Michael, may he rest in peace. I Knew You Were Waiting for Me. It got to number 1 on the Hot 100, number 5 on the R&B chart, number 2 on the Adult Contemporary chart, number 12 on the dance chart, and it cracked the top 5 of 6 other countries. It was certified gold in the UK, Australia, and the Netherlands. This is my favorite of her 1980s albums, and now Aretha has done it. She's finally produced a follow-up, just as good, if not better, in my humble opinion, than the one before. Which is why here I am proud to announce marks the end of the bandwagon era of her career. From now on, she will make music for fun, or to stay relevant, or just because she can. Between now and her next album, she's singing at a dozen shows around the US. Some of these were at New Bethel Baptist Church, where her late father preached at. These recordings were mixed into her 5th live album, One Lord, One Faith, One Baptism, which came out in 1987. That year also saw her revolutionary induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, becoming the first woman to receive this honor. She even got an honorary degree from the University of Michigan, but it wasn't all perfect for her. Remember Carolyn Franklin, occasional co-writer and frequent backup singer? She lost her battle with breast cancer in 1988. Truly a tragic loss. Even though she was weathering another storm of grief in her life, that always seems to be what she channels best when she makes new music. Her approach to this would be honed in on making an album she would like. Let's see how these loose ideas play out. Opener Give Me Your Love features James Brown, and it's pretty good. It's her fastest song in a while, and the energy is very present, if a little too present. Mercy is the first song of hers to have an orchestra hit. I wish you could see my face when I heard the first hit. Here's a reenactment.
Shake, shake yourself.
It was like a gunshot to my heart. In case you don't know what an orchestra hit is, it originated as a test recording for the first ever Fairlight CMI synthesizer way back in 1975. A developer needed something to test the sampling feature, so he put on a Stravinsky record, and the first thing to play was that orchestral hit at the beginning of one of the movements. This hit eventually became sample gold, and it was used by artists like Yes on Wonderful Lonely Heart, and nearly every video game soundtrack of the 16-bit era had an orchestra hit at some point. Vox made a great video about this, you should check it out. Oh, right, the other songs. It Isn't, It Wasn't, It Ain't Ever Gonna Be is a duet with Whitney Houston, and it is basically the female version of The Girl's Mind with Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney, but with more orchestra hits. This duet sounds like Aretha passing the torch to Whitney, especially since Whitney Houston would have more hits after this. I especially enjoyed the last 2 minutes where they tried to vocally one-up each other. Through This Rum has yet another high-profile guest star, Elton John. He does a great job, of course. I really like the production too. I think 1989 is a re-record of her hit from way back in 1968. No one really asked for this re-record, and it obviously has all the late 80s production staples like hard cuts, a sax solo, the synth sound that would later be in Mario Kart DS, and the programmed drums. No surprises, but thankfully we were spared from the orchestra hit on this song. The other re-record is Come To Me from 1980, and I have even less of an idea why she re-recorded it. Like, sure, it kind of made sense to re-record Think because she's getting a reintroduction, much like her commercial debut in the late 60s, but you, the viewers, may remember what I said 17 minutes ago about the 1980 version. They're counted as the same song on Spotify, so we'll never know which one got more plays. If Ever Love There Was has returning guests The Four Tops and Kenny G. His saxophone work on this song may be one of my favorites of all the saxophone work throughout her career. He's the Boy Exists. This album as a whole is enjoyable, forward-thinking in many ways, and stacked with guests, but it's not as great as Aretha 86. It is also a lot shorter than her other 80s efforts, so it is a good time, and no song lasts longer than it should. Through This Rum was released on April 25th, 1989. It got to number 55 on the Hot 200 and number 21 on the R&B chart. It made the top 100 of a few other countries, if barely. The most successful song here was the title track with Elton John, getting to number 16 on the Hot 100, number 17 on the R&B chart, and number 3 for Adult Contemporary, and not doing that well anywhere else. Between now and her next album, George Michael released Freedom 90. Wonder where he got that chorus from. performed twice at the Radio City Music Hall and twice in the Westbury Music Fair, with a few other shows in the US. Not all things during this time were great though. In December of 1989, her brother and longtime manager Cecil Franklin died, leaving Clive Davis to manage her. The 90s are here. Why not keep making music? After all, people will buy anything with Aretha's name on it. A reminder, we are in the pre-Nirvana 90s. All of the music coming out right now is sonically the same as the 80s. R&B is no exception. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So the now 49-year-old Aretha went back into the studio to sing even more songs to be put on record. Everyday People is a cover of the famous Sly and the Family Stone song. The difference is that this version is an amped early 90s funk version with orchestra hits. Ever Changing Times is a ballad sung with Michael McDonald, who originally sang that song she covered on Aretha 80, which is a nice full circle moment for them to be together. A similar sentiment is that Burt Bacharach is on producing duties, which is neat considering he wrote a few of her early hits. I Dreamed a Dream is a power ballad version of the Les Miserables song with multiple uplifting key changes. Doctor's Orders is a duet with Jump To It and Get It Right producer Luther Vandross. While no song on this album overstays its welcome, and it flows quite well, this album is all too familiar and feels very two-sided. These two sides being slow ballads like Someone Else's Eyes, You Can't Take Me for Granted, and What Did You Give, and danceable poppy break-dance oriented songs with orchestra hits like What You See Is What You Sweat, Mary Goes Round, and the Everyday People remix that occupies the closing spot here. She does both very well, but the dichotomy is uber present here. What You See Is What You Sweat was released June 5th, 1991, almost exactly 3 months before Nirvana's Nevermind would take the world by storm. Got to number 153 on the Hot 200, number 28 on the R&B chart, number 56 in Canada, and number 26 in Switzerland. This album did not do numbers, but do you think Aretha cared? She just wanted to make music for fun. She didn't care if it performed well. Between now and her next album, she took a very long break, the longest she had ever taken. While she wasn't recording music for her own albums, that doesn't mean she wasn't busy. From 1992 to 1994, she even did her first world tour in a long time. She quit smoking, citing that it was hurting her voice. She received a Grammy Legend Award and became a Kennedy Center honoree in 1994. She did some more acting as Home-Built Computer in The Brave Little Toaster and as Mrs. Murphy in The Blues Brothers 2000. And she even contributed a cover of Donny Hathaway's Someday We'll All Be Free to the Malcolm X soundtrack and her very own version of Oh Christmas Tree to an album to benefit the Special Olympics.
All I'm asking is for the respect with you.
It was in 1997 that Aretha decided her break was over. She was going to make a new album, one that would be a complete departure from the adult contemporary sound of her previous ones. She would look to a certain subgenre that she was enjoying for inspiration. This format took Motown sensibilities and put a late 90s spin on it. It was dubbed neo-soul. To dabble in neo-soul for this project, she decided not to stick to one producer or songwriter and let them float in and out of where she thought they had their place. She also brought on a few contemporary guests. A Rose Is Still a Rose is a strong opener. I like this song because it is clearly inspired by East Coast hip-hop. It still has her usual backup singer's vocal riffs, but that beat is unmistakably East Coast. I appreciated the interpolation of What I Am by Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians. And the song also features rapper Lauryn Hill. Never Leave You Again is R&B inspired, and also there are record scratches, and Simbi Kali is on this song. I'll Dip takes sonic cues from TLC, Ace of Base, and Destiny's Child, while How Many Times takes from Mariah Carey. Watch My Back is totally from the East Coast, but the highlight here is Closer, The Woman. It is my favorite song on here. It uses its length to keep things fresh and to tell you how expansive this song is. It should be mentioned that we don't get to the bridge until 4 minutes in, and then later in the song we get a swing, rhythm, piano-led, scat singing improvisational section for the second half of this 7-minute piece. Sadly, those are the only notable songs. I'll get the best parts of this album out of the way first. Every producer here is given at least 2 tracks here, so there's no room to screw around, and thankfully the production is pristine on every track and the instrumentals are adequately performed. Her voice is mixed very well, and obviously she's singing her best on every song, but there are 5 tracks that I can't even remember if I listened to. Those songs are, in case you forgot, Here We Go Again, Every Little Bit Hurts, In the Morning, and Love Pain. They are so one note that all I literally wrote down in my notes about them is that they are one note. Given that this album is over 50 minutes long, it would suffer less if these songs were cut all together. This late into her career, she has all the creative control an artist could ask for, and it makes me wonder why she okayed this. I also have a less personal problem with this record. The backup vocals don't reflect the emotions trying to be expressed in these songs, as is par for the course for the 90s, but this may belong for a time in the late 60s when her backup singers would be as important performers as Aretha herself. She would talk to, harmonize, and interact with them, but there is none of that present here. Altogether, this album is written with many bad choices in my opinion. A Rose is Still a Rose was released on March 10th, 1998. No living being in our universe pays much thought to what neural firings may precede my cranial space, because this album got to 30 on the Hot 200, number 7 on the R&B chart. It also reached number 59 in France and number 36 in Switzerland, and it was eventually certified gold. Between now and her next album, she took another prolonged break, and it seemed like from now on, Aretha would only make music here and there for fun. Slow down from recording, she did. Did she stop performing? Of course not! She worked very hard to promote herself, including the following: a performance with Mariah Carey, Carole King, Celine Dion, and others at the VH1 Divas concert, 2 appearances on Letterman, 1 on Conan, 1 on the Oprah Winfrey Show, another VH1 Divas concert with the Backstreet Boys, Kid Rock, Herbie Hancock, Stevie Wonder, and dozens of other concerts around the US, some of which were worked into her 6th live album, Gospel Greats, even one at Buckingham Palace, being her first show in the Eastern Hemisphere in 22 years. Her work to promote herself cannot be understated, and she even got the National Medal of Arts. But not every time between album cycles can be a time without grief. She sadly both lost her sister Irma and her half-brother Vaughn in late 2002. Five years had gone by at this point. She decided it was time to make another record. This time it would be different. Instead of honing in too much on one certain sound, this would be a collection of all her previous sounds, but above all, soul. She took a more personally involved approach to these songs, and that was what she felt to be the only thing missing. Speaking of which, on opener, The Only Thing Missing, her voice is showing age, and the beat given to her is unmistakably 2000s. Wonderful and Holding On also have beats with similar early 2000s R&B texture. No matter what, and Everybody's Fool are notable because she says the S word. So Damn Happy, You Are My Joy, and the epic You Are My Joy reprise are self-written and produced with Aretha's classical sensibilities, so they sound less dated than the rest of the album. Falling Out of Love is my favorite track off this one. It blends her slow 80s song production, and it's written by Burt Bacharach and produced by Hen. It's an all-around good song. Ain't No Way is interesting because it does a callback to Respect, which itself does a callback to Running Out of Fools. Good News is her first gospel song in a while. It has a chorus and an orchestra, but that wind chime sound effect alone has caused this to age like milk for me. There's even sampling on this. The last thing you know here is that she kept the lengths of these songs under 5 minutes to have a tight package with mass appeal. And it worked, kind of. So Damn Happy was released on September 16th, 2003. It got to number 33 on the Hot 100, number 11 on the R&B chart, and number 106 in France. Between now and her next album, she took another 5-year break. After over 20 years with the label, she decided to call it quits with Arista Records. During this time, the world collectively decided it was time to shower Aretha with awards. She was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom by George Bush, she was inducted into the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame, and the UK Music Hall of Fame, given honorary musical doctorates from Berklee College of Music and the University of Pennsylvania, and she was selected to be MusiCare's Person of the Year in 2008. She even got a few performances in. The highlights of these were the BET Awards, the Nobel Peace Prize Awards, the 2004 Macy's 4th of July Fireworks Spectacular, the opening of Super Bowl 40, the induction ceremony of the 2007 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees, WWE WrestleMania 23, and the 50th Grammy Awards. Just your average run-of-the-mill concert dates? No, seriously, it is insane the amount of high-profile events that had the privilege of Aretha singing at them. Aretha hadn't recorded any Christmas material since 1992, so she chose to sing some more Christmas songs and put it on a whole album. The production duties would be split between producer Tina Clark and Franklin herself. She even invited her son, Edward Franklin, to sing here. Angels We Have Heard on High has the arrangement of many of her late 60s, early 70s output. I liked her vocal delivery with the choir. The guitar solo when the beat picks up is quite impressive. This is the first song in a while to feature flashy bass playing too. This Christmas starts with a low-quality ringtone from a phone, reminding everyone that this came out in 2008, before she picks up the phone and has a dialogue with someone. It's an interesting way to start a song. It features her son Eddie Franklin White, who sings the second verse. I especially enjoyed the part where he goes off, and she says,
Eddie, you mustn't upstage Mom with those high notes.
Shake a hand, meet a friend, meet a...
On my grown-up Christmas list, she sings just fine. I like the interplay with the backing musicians, but I don't like this song. I like long songs, but no matter who does grown-up Christmas lists, it goes on for way too long. Let me know in the comments if you want to hear more about my opinions on Christmas songs. I don't know, maybe I'll make a tier list sometime. The Lord Will Make a Way is Christian, but it's not a Christmas song. That doesn't stop it from being good though. Silent Night reminds me of the time I sang it in my Christmas concert. Good song, mid-tier memory. No, I will not elaborate further. Ave Maria is good because it takes 3 minutes for the drums to come in, instead focusing on her voice, the orchestra, and the guitar. I should now mention how gracefully the production is aged, especially when compared to her last 5 albums. Christmas Ain't Christmas Without the One You Love and 14 Angels also have this spacious but not overwhelming production. One Night with a King is epic with its long intro and its use of layering over the 6-minute duration. Adding in piano, electric piano, organ, backup singers, it's a fine-tuned masterpiece. It reminds me of her earlier work in the late 60s, which is always a good thing. Hark the Herald Angels Sing is great because it has an orchestra, but still has interplay, and Closer 'Twas the Night Before Christmas is spoken word. I love how when she says the dreaded S word, it's actually covered up with a real 1 kilohertz beep instead of the usual musical censorship. And you can hear the people in the studio laughing at the end. What a way to close out the 2000s. This Christmas Aretha was released on October 14th, 2008 through DMI Records. It weirdly enough was only available through Borders Bookstore, but since it has been put on streaming. Between now and her next album, she performed quite a few times per year, including the Hollywood Bowl and the 25th Rock and Roll Hall of Fame anniversary. But the best performance of hers during this time, and one of the most important moments of her entire career, was when she performed My Country 'Tis of Thee at the inauguration of the first ever African-American US President, Barack Obama, signifying how long the struggle for equity had been going on, and it was truly a bright day in America, and it would be smooth sailing from here with absolutely no problems. Additionally, she was given honorary doctorates in music from both Brown and Yale universities. Experiments are fine in my opinion. Aretha was definitely an adventurous soul, as we have seen, but one of her most interesting experiments was founding her own record label. At age 69, she founded Aretha's Records. This record label doesn't exist outside of this one album. It is just another way of saying she self-released it. She recorded many different song ideas from 2006 to 2010, making this the longest time spent recording an album in her entire career. All these tracks would be taken into the studio, and she would select the producers, and she would even produce half the tracks herself. On Opener, How Long I've Waited, right away I have mixed feelings. She gave it all with her vocal delivery, but the production sounds like the late 80s, early 90s albums. You already know how I feel about that style of production, but this feels like a progression. Every instrumentalist is doing their best here. Obviously Aretha's giving it her all, but a lot of this album is so backward thinking, and this could just be a result of her self-producing. But there were several times during my listen, like on When Two Become One, that I had to remind myself this came out in 2011, and then shake my head in disbelief. Sweet 16 is a cover of a B.B. King song, and I enjoy the way the guitar playing emulated King's playing. This, you should know, has the 80s production, but it also has the choir backing her up. I also enjoyed the flares of synthesizers. They added a lot of color. Her lyrical flow on You Can't See Me is remarkable. Also, she says shoddy, so automatic 10 out of 10. I chuckled a bit when I heard the line, I can't help you, at the end. A Summer Place is a cover of the classic Percy Faith song. Apparently there's a version with lyrics I just didn't know it existed.
The theme from a summer place. It's the theme. Next!
I like the ending section where all the instruments except for her voice drop out, and it's just her talking over her own riffing voice. The song breaks 8 minutes and is the longest song of her studio career. The reason I say studio is because the version of Amazing Grace from the live album of the same name broke 10 minutes. My personal favorite off this album is her rendition of Barbra Streisand's The Way We Were. It returns to the 80s production with that side stick with reverb, but it's a duet with Ronald Isley of Isley Brothers fame, so that more than justifies it. This track may be one of the best uses of an orchestra in her discography. New Day has the most modern production of any song on this album, at least in 2011, as it wasn't given Aretha's magic touch. Put It Back Together Again is fantastic. It has the 80s production with synth, but it uses piano, harp, and slap bass. The main instrumental hook is literally the pentatonic scale, and it is pulled off in a way no Chinese classical music ever could. Faithful has Karen Clark's shirt on it. While I had never heard of her until I heard this album, her performance was likable. His Eye on the Sparrow is good, as it is completely sung by Eddie Franklin White, who you might remember from 3 years ago on This Christmas. His delivery is very slow and deliberate, with the complimentary organ that backs him up. Closer My Country 'Tis of Thee is a good way to end the album. It has brass instruments, a marching snare, and tubular bells. It reminds me of Queen ending A Night at the Opera with God Save the Queen, which, by the way, is the same melody that has been traded between cultures since the 1800s. It sounds just as good as her performance at Obama's inauguration. A Woman Falling Out of Love was released on May 3rd, 2011. It was a Walmart exclusive release before it was made available to non-Walmart shoppers a month later. Since it came from Aretha's Records, it is not available on Spotify or any other streaming service. Its lead single only got to number 94 on the R&B chart, but the album itself fared way better, getting to number 54 on the Hot 200 and number 15 on the R&B chart. Critical reception was negative, and most critics talk about how dated the album's production was. Guess they weren't ready for that 80s revival we're getting right now. Between now and her next album, she performed at Oprah's Farewell Spectacular, the 2012 and 2014 BET Honors, the 2013 American Idol finale, the Today Show, Letterman, and another American tour. She was very prolific. And she got engaged to longtime friend William Wilkerson before calling it off soon after. It is now 2014. Taylor Swift and John Legend are ruling the charts. Lorde has just released her revolutionary album, Pure Heroin. I wanted to mention this to remind you viewers just what kind of time frame we are currently in. Aretha has decided she's going to make a covers album from female pop divas throughout the course of history. She would also team up with producers new and old to accomplish this goal of having all generations in one. These producers would include Arista head Clive Davis, Babyface, The Underdogs, and Andre 3000. Sessions were reported as going well, but let's see if the musical aspect is positive. Lead-off song At Last has the orchestration of the Etta James version, but it also has that finger-snapping and ever-present kick drum of the mid-2010s. Her voice is very strong here. Rolling in the Deep is a version of the Adele song released 3 years prior, and it shows that she is willing to put her spin on newer songs. I like the incorporation of Ain't No Mountain High Enough, but the backing track felt more like just a backing track than every other song on this album. Midnight Train to Georgia is a version of the Gladys Knight hit. She sings beautifully, but the Beyonce-style backup singers and beat made it lose that timeless quality of the original. I Will Survive is a cover of the Gloria Gaynor song. It incorporates bits of Survivor by Destiny's Child. Her voice goes surprisingly well with the dance pop backing track. Makes me wish she made more music like this in the early 2010s when those club beats were popular. People is most famously done by Barbra Streisand. It's nice to slow down after the empowering first 4 tracks. No One is originally by Alicia Keys. The reggae production certainly was a surprise. I'm Every Woman / Respect is a mashup of the Chaka Khan song and the Otis Redding song that Aretha made even more famous. It's the longest song from this album, but it's still just under 5 minutes. That really shows that she tried to make this album appeal to the radio. Teach Me Tonight was made famous by Dinah Washington. You might recognize that name because of Aretha's tribute album to her, and its 2014 release coming out over 50 years after her death is a full circle moment. Production's jazz-oriented, much like her early work. You Keep Me Hanging On was performed by the Supremes, and closing Nothing Compares to You, the Sinead O'Connor classic, is the perfect way to end an album. This song is the whole package. There's jazz drumming, a bass and a piano, and a frolicking fast pace unlike the O'Connor or Prince and the Family versions. She performs from the heart right out until the album ends. This album is the covers album. But a lot of her albums are already cover albums, because every song on this album is already really well known, leading to this feeling more like a covers album than every other one of hers. Aretha Franklin Sings the Great Diva Classics was released on October 17, 2014 through RCA. Rolling in the Deep had its greatest success on the US dance chart, soaring to number 1. The album itself did remarkable numbers, especially for the transitional year of 2014, shooting to number 13 on the Hot 200 and number 3 on the R&B chart. Throughout 2014 and 2015, Aretha played at various jazz festivals, but the most important performance of this time and of her entire late career was when she sang You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman at the 2015 Kennedy Center Honors. This is notable for a number of reasons, like the amount of different generations that she's reached being reflected through the wide variety of people at this performance. There's Barack and Michelle Obama, there's Carole King, who wrote the song, going absolutely nuts at her performance. There's the resounding moment where she stands up from the piano, and despite all of the trauma her family faced, the amounts of death she had to endure, the pressure put on her by Columbia, Atlantic, and Arista to succeed and eclipse the I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You and Lady Soul albums, Aretha does what she does best. She sings. Through this, she forms a deep spiritual connection to everyone in the auditorium, and the video has been watched by over 4.5 million people on YouTube. Truly a remarkable achievement, and a testament to how much impact she's had on music and American culture. She continued to tour throughout 2016, and then she announced that she would retire from touring after 2017. She initially scheduled some concert dates for 2018, but they were canceled as per her doctor's advice. And her last concert ever played was on November 7th, 2017, at the 25th Elton John AIDS Foundation Gala. And then, on August 13th of 2018, she fell ill and was placed into hospice care. Even though she had been battling pancreatic cancer for over 10 years at this point, nothing could stop her from singing during that time. But despite treatments, cancer was catching up to her. Stevie Wonder, ex-husband Glenn Turman, and Jesse Jackson visited her deathbed, and she died on August 16th, 2018, at the age of 76 in Detroit, and her pure soul left her body behind. Many people, including Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Ariana Grande, Stevie Wonder, Gladys Knight, Al Sharpton, and Jennifer Hudson, paid tribute at her funeral. Much of the discourse these days surrounding Aretha Franklin's music is about the impact that she has had, and this is quite apparent as she has inspired an innumerable amount of black and female artists to create, to sing, to play the piano, and most importantly, be confident with their true voice and essence. Her influence has reached so far across space and time that she has been dubbed the Queen of Soul by pop culture, and that is a very high honor to be called the king or queen of anything. There are so many more failure stories than success stories of those who were inspired by her, but the greatest successes of all time were Whitney Houston, Chaka Khan, and Jennifer Hudson. That last artist is very important. Why, you may ask? She was selected to play Aretha in a biopic that came out in 2021 called Respect. It was a good movie and it didn't do anything over the top, it told it just like it is. My one biggest problem was that the film ends in 1972 at the Amazing Grace recordings, and while that is a good place to end a narrative arc, as she did just get out of a rough marriage and quit drinking, it doesn't talk about how her father died, the hardships she went through with Atlantic, her insane commercial resurgence in the 80s, or anything beyond, although they'd probably have to make a double-length movie in order to truly capture the full scope of her life like the movie about Gandhi. It truly is hard to condense an artist's career into an hour, especially one as long and eventful as Aretha's, but I try to do it here with this video. Respect was included in Rock Band 4's DLC, and it was also included as #1 on the Greatest Songs of All Time list by Rolling Stone, and she was also put at the #1 spot of their Greatest Singers list. Allow me to throw a stone out of the half-open window in my glass house here. Please do not listen to all 39 of her albums if you want to enjoy her music. There are some true gems in her discography, and the amount of hits she made is impeccable, and she amazingly kept her sound fresh and intuitive to the day she died, but she would have been better served if she were allowed to explore her own voice and talent by making a few masterpieces instead of cranking out one album a year to satisfy those that owned her career. It is not worth going through all of her albums to unearth those gems. In fact, I recommend you check out the individual songs I talked about with high praise more than anything, but if you want to get into Aretha, you can't go wrong with I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You and Lady Soul. Spirit in the Dark, Young, Gifted, and Black, and Hate Out Hey are her most creative albums. If you want a taste of her early work, you should listen to Unforgettable or Yeah. And if you're interested in how her 80s work sounded, I suggest you check out Love All the Hurt Away, Jump to It, Who's Zoomin' Who, and Aretha 86. Those are the best bets, but I cannot stress enough about how 39 albums is just too much to listen to. In fact, 39 drops of hot sauce is too much to drink. Nope, that was very easy. Should use a shot glass. Despite inadvertently having to examine a genius artist with over 60 years of experience and 30 albums in her discography, Close Chronology examinations will be sticking to a monthly schedule, and I'm going to try to get caught up with the series as long as my own musical goals and other videos don't interfere. But there needs to be some changes. From now on, I will only mention every single song on an album if it is a concept album. While Aretha's music speaks for itself, which was a miracle in this instance, as it kept this video from being any longer than it had to be, making myself talk about every song on every album encourages a bunch of rapid-fire opinions that aren't formed well. Another huge change is that Barbra Streisand has been dropped from the wheel on account of her 36 albums, and Chicago, on account of their 29 albums, has been suspended from the wheel until I catch up with my monthly schedule. I never planned on doing a Beach Boys examination, but upon looking at their discography of 29 studio albums, I've been convinced even more not to do them. Even though all of these artists fall under the category of my favorites, they just have too many albums for me to have fun making a video. Some of you may be wondering, why did you add Aretha in the first place? Well, I wanted to include some artists from my home state, and I absolutely loved the music and already knew a lot of singles from her. I even saw the 39 albums before I added her, and I thought, you know, this could be a challenge. I spent time in 3 different seasons in 2022 making this video. That was a challenge. Now that I'm done with this video, no matter how much I love Aretha and her voice and the production and the duets with guests, I would never do anything like this again. There is something to be said about how she worked so hard to make 39 studio albums, and the least I could have done was to review all of these in a video. And I've learned so many things, like how to structure a long project, which I hope will be useful to me in the future, but a lesson learned is not a lesson worth being learned twice. I want to remind any of you keeping track of both Mike the Snare and I, he took an extended break to mourn the loss of a family member and came back from that break, and I hadn't uploaded anything but those one-off videos during that time. To which I am sorry for you viewers who didn't get any substantial content from me. I hope they were good enough. I had fun making those videos, and I hope you had fun watching them. And I hope you had fun watching this video too. Other big news, I hit 80 subscribers and got all the way up to 90. Thank you to those who subscribed, and I will be doing a Q&A video once I actually get 90 subscribers. Since YouTube hates the color red now for no reason, hit that white subscribe button to get me there sooner. Please feel free to suggest artists to me in the comments below. You can lead me to a chronology, but you can't make me examine it. Big thanks to my parents, friends, and whoever else supported me during the making of this video. I couldn't have done it without you. Of course, you should like and leave a comment to let me know about what you think about her music, and I hope to see all 90 of you next time.